In this video, we're going to talk about how to add integers when both of the integers have the same sign and when they both have different signs. There are two cases when we add integers with the same sign. They're either both going to be positive or they're both going to be negative. We've seen adding integers when they're both positive before, so 3 plus 5 is going to be 8. The original two integers were positive, so the resulting integer is also going to be positive. When we're adding negative numbers together, your first step is actually taking the absolute value of both of the integers and adding those together. So the absolute value of negative 3 plus the absolute value of negative 5 is equal to 3 plus 5, because the absolute value just makes the numbers positive, and we know this to be 8. But going back to the original problem, we were looking at negative 3 plus negative 5. Because both of those integers are negative to start out, instead of the answer being positive 8, it's actually going to be negative 8. So when we add two negative numbers together, just add their positives together and make that resulting number negative, and that's your answer. So to look at another example, 8 plus 17, two positives being added together, that's going to equal a positive. We're just going to add those together like normal to get positive 25. But when we have negative 8 plus negative 17, first step, add their absolute values together. Absolute value of negative 8, positive 8, and absolute value of negative 17 is positive 17. And we're just going to add those like normal and get 25. But again, because the original two integers were negative, the resulting integer is going to be negative as well. So instead of positive 25, we get negative 25. When we add integers with different signs, the process is similar but not exactly the same. So if we're looking at something like 4 plus negative 9, the first step is actually still going to be taking the absolute values of the numbers, but we're not going to add them together. We're going to take the absolute value of 4 and get 4, and the absolute value of a negative 9 is 9. Our next step is now going to be subtracting those two numbers, and we're always going to do largest minus smallest, so 9 minus 4. That gets us 5. The last step is we're going to take the sign of the largest absolute value, and that's going to be the sign of our answer. So of the two absolute values, 9 was the largest, and since in the original problem, 9 was negative, 4 plus negative 9 is going to be negative 5, because that larger of the two absolute value was negative, so the resulting integer also has to be negative. So in the case of negative 4 plus 9, again, starting with taking the absolute value of both numbers, absolute value of negative 4 is 4, absolute value of 9 is 9. Subtract the numbers, largest minus smallest, so 9 minus 4, we're going to get that 5 again. But going back to the absolute values, the larger of the absolute values is still that 9, but in this case, the 9 was positive in the beginning, so our resulting integer is going to be positive. So negative 4 plus 9 is positive 5, because that 9 is the larger of the two absolute values. Looking at another example, if we have negative 22 plus 6, and we take our absolute values, so absolute value of negative 22 is 22, absolute value of 6 is 6, subtract the numbers, largest minus smallest, and we're going to get 16. And looking back at our absolute values, 22 is the larger of the absolute values, and 22 is negative in the original problem, so our resulting integer is going to be negative as well. So negative 22 plus 6 is negative 16. In our second part here, we're going to take the absolute value of 22. That's going to be 22. Take the absolute value of -6. We're going to get 6. Same thing. We're going to do 22 minus 6. Again, largest minus smallest absolute value. We're always going to subtract in that order. And then that is still going to get us 16. And our larger of the two absolute values, still that 22, but in the original problem, the 22 was positive. So our resulting integer of 22 plus -6 is going to be positive 16. Looking at a few extra examples, our first one here is 12 plus -5. Since these two integers have different signs, we're going to start off by taking the absolute value of 12 to get 12, and the absolute value of a -5 to get positive 5. We're going to subtract those. So we're going to do 12 minus 5, always the larger minus the smaller, and we're going to get 7. Looking at the larger of the two absolute values, that was our 12. It's positive in the original problem, so our answer is also going to be positive. So positive 12 plus -5 gets us positive 7. In the case of 44 plus 3, we've seen integers being added together when they're both positive. So we're going to add those together like we have in the past and just get positive 47. Two positives will always equal positive. In the case of two negatives, like number 3, we have -8 plus -12. Similar to number 2, we're going to add their positive values together, their absolute values, but the answer is going to be negative. So think about it as the absolute value of -8, which is positive 8. The absolute value of -12 is positive 12. When we add those together, we get 20. But the original problem wasn't 8 plus 12, it was -8 plus -12. So the answer also has to be negative. So instead of positive 20, it's going to be -20. And then number 4, we have that pesky different sign problem. But again, we're going to just take the absolute value of each number. So our absolute value of 10 is 10, and the absolute value of -32 is positive 32. Subtract the larger absolute value minus the smaller. So in this case, 32 is that larger absolute value. So 32 minus 10, we're going to get 22. Since 32 was the larger of the two absolute values, we're going to look at 32 in the original problem. It was negative in this case. So instead of our answer being positive 22, it's going to be -22 because 32 was that larger absolute value and it was negative in the original problem.